Welcome to Dignified Family Transitions with Lilie the Lawyer.
Welcome back to Dignified Family Transitions with Lilie the Lawyer. Lilie McRoberts is a Minnesota family law attorney and mediator who helps individuals and families navigate divorce and custody matters with a focus on problem solving, not conflict, and practical, respectful solutions. Now, did you know that Minnesota provides the forms and instructions that you need to get a divorce/custody order without an attorney? I'm Evan Mack, and today we're talking about using Minnesota's self-help family law forms and what you should know before getting started. Miss Lilie, welcome back, my dear.
It's so good to be back. Thanks so much for having me, Evan.
So, Lilie, why is it so important that the Minnesotans are aware of the resources available to them when they're going through a family transition like divorce or even child custody?
Well, it is very important to me to share my knowledge with Minnesotans because the fact of the matter is that, you know, when you're faced with a divorce or when you find yourself with a breakup and really you're going through some sort of family transition where you are going to have to encounter the Minnesota courts um, to affect that transition. Usually that's science tells us that's sometimes some of the most traumatic experiences that we have in our lives. And I really want people to be able to get to the other side, not only with dignity and grace, but with a better sense of self. And frankly, the system that we have right now is broken. The system that, okay, I have to get a divorce. I'm on a budget. I mean, inflation is crazy right now. I hate the idea of people making decisions about one of the most important parts of their lives based solely on the fact that they can't afford an attorney. Um, and there are some really wonderful uh, attorneys out there, including myself, that offer unbundled services. And what unbundled services are is a way that you can do it yourself until you run into problems. And then you can reach out to an attorney and say, can you help me through this one particular part of the process? And then you go back and you keep on working on the process yourself. My philosophy and vision at McRoberts Law is empowering my clients, empowering Minnesotans, no matter where they find themselves on their legal journey. And it is something that's really important to me because I really think that there is a place for improving the quality of life, not only among adult Minnesotans, but among the children in this state. If the process for divorce um, is streamlined so that people don't go through so much trauma. And so part two of my vision is empowering people so that they can see what they can do on their own. And it's actually amazing. Minnesota's forms are robust and they are user friendly. It's confusing, but you really truly can get yourself there in many instances without even having to pay a huge amount of money, filing fees. Sometimes you can even avoid the filing fees if you qualify. And if you run into a problem, there are attorneys out there like myself that can help get you back on track.
Hmm. So can you walk us through what Minnesota's, self-help family law forms are, what people actually use them for?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm focusing on family law matters right now, but there's forums out there for pretty much everything. There are certain things that can be done in Minnesota where there are not forms for on the self-help pages, but there are forms for a lot of things that you'll need to do if you ever encounter the justice system. If you ever find yourself where you need to go to court. But I'm going to be focusing mostly on family law forms. Before I start navigating the Minnesota courts site to show you where the forms are, though, I want to take a moment for family law cases for you to understand the different case types because you're not going to be able to find the form if you don't know what case type you're looking at. So the, there are adoption forms in there. It's pretty obvious. If you need to go in adoption, that's adoption is your case type. With adoption, though, there are a few different kinds of adoptions. The only forms that are available on Minnesota courts for adoptions are step-parent adoption and adult adoption. So, like, if you're a 21-year-old and you wanted to have the stepfather that raised you your entire life adopt you, really just for no other reason than to acknowledge that he's basically your father, then you could go on and do that as adult adoption. Um, that's adoption. There's name changes forms in there. That's another thing that I do, and I can show you where to go to do the name changes. But then when you talk about family law, um, most people are thinking about, I want to do a divorce by myself. But if you have a child with someone and you're not married to them, you're not going to be able to get a custody order established through the divorce process. So there's a custody uh, form that you would use instead. So those are the different case types. The other thing that's important to understand is stages within the case. So in a divorce or in a custody establishment case, there are three distinct stages. So there's going to be the initial establishment of the order. Um, and then there's going to be, once you've got that judgment, either if you've settled on it and you got a divorce and decree filed jointly, or if you went to trial and a judge told you what the divorce decree was. Once you have that divorce decree or that custody judgment established, then there's two other stages. So you can go back to court if you need to modify. So that would be modifications. But then there's also enforcement. So, like, if someone isn't following the order, then there would be enforcement, and that would be in contempt. So it's important to understand the different case types and then the different case stages. So now that we've covered that, I can talk to you a little bit about what the forms are and where you would want to go. So you're going to go to minnesotacourts.gov. If you can't remember what the URL is, just do a search in Google Minnesota courts, and it'll bring you to that page. There's so much on this page I use for many, many, many different things. This is one of my bookmarked pages. But in there, you'll find a page that says Help Topics. So you're going to want to click on that. And then you're going to go to the Help Topics A to Z. And then when you're in there, it's really alphabetical order. So we're going to start with going down to the divorce category. So it's divorce/dissolution. And when you're on this screen, I'm gonna go over different parts of the screen, because every single one of the self-help pages has this sort of screen here. So you're gonna see on the top menu, basically, like, if you click on these, it's going to bring you back and you're going to loop. So don't worry about the brown ones on the top here, because it's just going to loop. But on the left side, it's really important. There's overview, there's definitions, there's frequently asked questions, there's forms, there's rules and laws, and there's tools and resources. So this is overwhelming when you first start, but it's really important, whatever your case type is, that you take the time to read the overview and then read the definitions and read the frequently asked questions and then read the rules and laws and read the tools and resources and go to the forms last, because this is going to be something that's going to you should prepare for like 6 to 8 hours of understanding what it is that you're doing. You think about the definitions. Like, if we open up the definitions tab, one of the things that annoys people about lawyers is that if you think about the definition of a word, you think, well, I know what that means because it's defined in the dictionary. I know what that means. But the thing is that if a lawyer has taken the time to define a term, or the state legislature has taken the time to define a term, it could mean something slightly different than what you think it means. And so take the time to look at the definitions. And a few of the definitions that are really important that we need to talk about are custody labels. And so I'm just going to take a moment to talk about custody labels in Minnesota. Custody labels in Minnesota are there's either legal custody or physical custody. Legal custody deals with decision making, and if the parties can communicate appropriately, then the courts have said there's a presumption in Minnesota that the parties have joint legal custody. So if you hear people saying 50-50, in your brain think they mean joint legal custody and try to use the term joint legal custody. The presumption is in Minnesota that you have joint legal custody that deals with decision making on education, on medical and religious decision making. Now, in Minnesota, that presumption is flipped so that one party has sole legal custody when there's evidence of domestic violence. Well, why is that? Well, that's because the parties need to be able to properly communicate with each other in order to make these really important decisions. If a child is 15 years old and they're really pushing to get an elective breast reduction surgery or something like that, how are you going to make that decision together if you can't communicate? And so those are in those instances, then the presumption is flipped. So one of the big ones is legal custody. Physical custody is, I mean, I don't want to say it's a meaningless label. It's not a meaningless label, but people get caught up with it a lot, and it can be important. It's kind of like where the child primarily lives, but it doesn't have to. You don't have to have sole physical custody if the child lives with you more than 50% of the time. So those are the custody labels. And then there's also parenting time. Parenting time is something that's really important to figure out before you start working on these forms. And parenting time deals with the percentage of overnights that either parent has. In Minnesota, it's presumed that each parent should have at least 25% of the overnights, which comes to be about 92 days. Anyway, so all of that is to say it's important to understand what the definitions are and really understand what these things mean and have these conversations with your spouse when you're going in to fill out these forms, because there's a lot of information that you're going to need in order to fill out these forms. So first of all, you read all of these things and then you can go into the forms themselves. Now, I'm not going to take you through every single form because it would take forever, but these forms all have certain characteristics that they share. And so when you're starting a divorce and when you're trying to establish custody or parenting time, if you're unmarried, you're going to have to decide whether or not you're in agreement with the person that you're divorcing or the parent of your child. And there's a lot that goes into, like, you can say that you're in agreement, but until you look at the forms, you don't necessarily know everything that you need to be in agreement on. Like, what are we going to do with this house that we share if you own real estate?
Right.
Regardless, if you are in agreement, you can do what's called a joint petition. So anytime you open up a case in Minnesota, you're going to do it with petition or with a complaint in civil cases. So that opens the case, then the court assigns case numbers. You can either do it with a joint petition, which is basically saying we're filing together. We're in agreement on everything. In certain instances, when you file a joint petition, you don't even need to have a hearing. If you have no children and you file a joint petition, you may not even have to have a hearing. The judge might just sign off on the order. So you have to decide whether or not you're in agreement on everything. If you are in agreement on everything, you're going to do a joint petition. And then if you are not in agreement on everything and you just want to serve the other party, then you're going to have to do a petition and a summons. And a petition and a summons need to be served on the other party. And there's instructions in every single one of these forms. There's instructions that detail what the process is. It needs to be served on the other party. Either they can sign an admission of service, or you're going to need to get a process server to serve this on the other party. And that process server, so you can have anyone that you know that's over 18. You just can't be a party to the case, but you can also hire a process server. I'll try to get some links to some good process servers later on. So those are the basics that people need to know, be aware of in order to go through these forms. But every single form has an instruction that goes with it. And the wonderful thing about Minnesota is that many of these forms actually have multiple languages available. And the other last thing that I'll say about it is every county has a law library, and if you run into problems, you can go and talk to the law library. But there are lots of nuances that you can also reach out to an attorney if you get stuck.
So with that being said, though, when it comes to these forms, what mistakes do you see people make when, filling out or submitting any of these forms?
There's a lot of legalese in there. I think that the biggest mistake that a person makes is they start second guessing them too soon. So I tell the story of, like, you're capable of more things than you think you are. You just have to take a step back when you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm in over my head. So when I was a kid, I was super excited to go into college. I had Algebra 1, Algebra 2, not trigonometry, geometry, but I tested like way higher than I really felt my math skills supported. And so then they put me in, I can't even remember the name of the math at this point because I've gotten so far away from the sciences. They put me on a math that I was like, there's no way I could do that. But the test said that I could. So then I got the book and I studied like weeks before school started. And then I was in class like 2 weeks in, and the professor drew like an infinity symbol, and a symbol that I didn't recognize. And I was like, I'm in way over my head, and I dropped the class. And looking back on it, I really do regret that. And then I ended up moving into the humanities and away from the sciences, and I didn't need it. But I really wish that I would have stuck with it. Like, you seriously just take a step back. If you really feel like you're stuck, go ahead and reach out to me and schedule an appointment. But you're capable of more than you think that you are. Just if you get stuck, go back to the frequently asked questions. Go back to this, this initial page that I was telling you where there's a lot of definitions. I would say definitely start by reviewing all of the other materials that are available. You don't need to spend too much time on tools and resources. That's going to take you somewhere else. I don't expect you to spend a lot of time reading the rules and the laws, but it's really nice. That section actually tells you what the code tells you to do. There's lots of places in the forms that say, get a lawyer if you have this certain situation, or talk to a lawyer if you have questions. And I think that that's absolutely true. I can't give anyone legal advice on this podcast. Nothing that I say on this podcast is legal advice, and it couldn't be, because legal advice is applying the law to specific facts, and I don't know anyone's specific facts. It is always a good idea to talk to an attorney. If you can afford it, hire an attorney to review the paperwork before you file it. But you don't necessarily have to. And also, it doesn't have to be perfect. There's things that you need to have in there, but like, you're never going to get it to be perfect. So just give yourself grace and give yourself time. Look at the form first, see what's in there, and see what information that you need to have, and go. And there's a lot of information that you need to have before you get a divorce. And if you look ahead of time and you get that information, you're not going back to the form 100,000 times, and that's helpful too. And there's another tip, which this is kind of technical and nerdy, but there's fillable forms, or which you can fill out like on your computer, and then you can just print it out as a PDF. With the fillable form, if you open it as a PDF, I don't care what version, you can have the most latest version of Adobe. You need to download the version onto your computer. It's going to give you an error message. Just download it anyway, and then go and open the actual file, and then you'll have the fillable forms. So
good stuff. Miss Lilie, thank you so much for your time.
yeah, thank you.
All right, guys, that's it for today's episode of Dignified Family Transitions with Lilie the Lawyer. If you're navigating a divorce or custody issue in Minnesota and want to explore a more thoughtful, problem-solving approach, you can learn more about Lilie McRoberts and her work at minnesotasfamilyattorney.com. Thank you for listening, and be sure to like, subscribe to the show, and leave a review if you found this episode helpful. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.